Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa. And I present these videos every week for a couple different reasons. The first of which is just to move my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the mode of writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. And the second is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason, to gain some different insight into the assigned gospel text for the week. That is why I do these. Now, this particular Sunday is January 1st, 2017. So Happy New Year. As we move from 2016 into 2017. This particular Sunday is the first Sunday of Christmas. Perhaps you've heard the song before, the 12 Days of Christmas. That's because the season of Christmas here in the church is 12 days. Typically, following Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day, there are 2 Sundays of Christmas when we are still celebrating that time, celebrating the Savior coming into the world. This particular year, with the way the calendar falls, or the days of the week fall, with Christmas Day having been on Sunday, there's actually only one Sunday of Christmas this year, and then we'll hit Epiphany toward the end of next week, and then we'll be into the season of Epiphany starting up a week from now. So that's kind of where we're at in the calendar and everything, as we're making the transition from one year into the new year and all of that happiness going on. So with all that being said, this particular Sunday's gospel, which is coming out of Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 23, is kind of an eye-opener. As I said, we've been dealing with the season of Christmas, or we're in the season of Christmas and celebrating the birth of Jesus. And this particular story, which only comes up once every 3 years when we're into the year of Matthew, it's quite jarring, and it's a story known as the slaughter of the innocents. Essentially what happens, which you'll hear when we get there, is King Herod, Herod the Great, the first of the Herods. There's quite a few of them that were kind of ruling different parts of Israel over the course of about a century and a half. King Herod the Great was the appointed king of Israel, was appointed by or recognized by Rome. So Israel was a kind of a vassal state of the Roman Empire at the time. But he was known to be very paranoid, very power hungry. He was very much a tyrant, not a nice guy. And pretty much all of chapter 2 is kind of Herod's story, or Herod the Great's story, as his power is threatened by this Messiah, by this new king who's coming to the world. Now, the first part of chapter 2 deals with the Magi, or the wise men, who come from the east. Interestingly enough, and I always got to point it out, the wise men are not part of the nativity. Typically we think of them being at the birth of Jesus. They were not there. They showed up later, anywhere from probably a few weeks to months, all the way up to possibly even 2 years after the birth of Jesus, before the wise men show up. And but they do, because they had seen the star of Jesus rise at his birth, and they were astrologers. Magi means magician. They were probably astrologers. They weren't kings. We always hear we three kings. No, but so they show up essentially at Herod's doorstep, like, hey, where's the new king that has been born? We have seen a star rise, and we have come to pay him homage. They show up, and this is the first that Herod hears about it. He's like, wait, what? There's a king? What? No, I'm the king? What? So he kind of conspires to try and have Jesus killed. He doesn't know it's Jesus per se, but this new king, this child who was born to be king, he conspires to have him killed. And so he tries to trick the wise men into saying, once you find him, tell me where he is so that I can go pay him homage too, which basically means so I can go kill him. But they are warned in a dream, so they do not return to Herod. They return home by another road, is the way it goes. And so that's kind of where we pick up with today's story. Now that I've been talking for almost 5 minutes, how about we actually get into it? But that's the background. So keep in mind that this is all kind of playing in the powers that be, the political powers, being Herod, being threatened by this new power that is coming into the world. Okay. Now, after they had left, they being the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated and sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children, she refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. All right, so that's the story. Some differences here with what we see of the baby account in Luke. Again, the presence of the wise men, the threatening of Herod. Within Luke's gospel, we don't really hear much about the political issues or the political problems of that Jesus faced or that his family faced. But it's interesting to note that Joseph and Mary and Jesus are pretty much political refugees, which is very telling at this time, considering the climate of culture right now. And they're threatened by the powers that be, so they flee into Egypt. Now, when we think of Egypt geographically today, that doesn't necessarily include the Sinai Peninsula, but it did at that time. That was considered "quote unquote" Egypt, and that's actually quite close to Israel. So it's possible that they were not fleeing as far as we tend to think of it, but they left the region where Herod was in control for the protection of Jesus. And as we hear, Herod goes out and orders his soldiers to kill a bunch of babies that are in this specific region, which was close to Jerusalem, where he would have been, Bethlehem, and to try and eliminate the threat to his power. Now, we don't know how many children that entails. Bethlehem was not a real huge town, so it's possible that, I've heard it speculated that this might have been 15 or 20 kids, which is horrible in itself, but perhaps not as widely recognized at the time because it was a small amount of people. But yet we have this account that this happened, that the powers that be sought the life of Jesus as a future threat, so kill him now. These innocent babies are killed because of that association. Now Jesus is saved because of this angelic dream interference that seems to happen with Joseph. And so he goes into Egypt and then eventually is called out of Egypt, and he is spared even though a bunch of children are killed, which sounds an awful lot like Moses. And there's a definite connection. Moses is the savior, not the savior, but the deliverer of the Old Testament, and now Jesus is the deliverer of the New Testament. So that combination or that connection is definitely present there. But something that catches my attention is that Joseph is the active character here, as opposed to Luke, where Mary is really the active one, and the angel appears to Mary, and Joseph is more kind of a passive participant, at least in the way the dialogue goes on. But here it's the other way around. Joseph is the active one. And Mary is not even named within this chapter anyway. She is earlier, but in chapter 1. But here in chapter 2, she's just the mother of Jesus. And we hear over and over that phrase, Joseph took the child and his mother. So Jesus and his mother. They are both very passive, Mary especially. It kind of makes me wonder, what did she think about this whole deal? But all of that being said, it puts me in mind of the source of power. And I think this is the direction that I'm going with the sermon. Herod sees Jesus as a threat, even though he doesn't know who Jesus is. He knows the notion of Messiah. They all would have as Jewish people. That the Messiah was the anointed one. That's what Messiah means. Christ also does, just different languages. It means God's anointed one. And the anointed one was the king, was anointed to be the king. So King Saul went all the way back, then David, then Solomon. They were all anointed to be king. And so if one is anointed, that means that they're going to be king. So for Herod, who's so paranoid that he actually orders the death of 2 of his own kids and 1 of his wives, is obviously going to feel threatened by this other person who potentially could threaten his rule. And so that's why he seeks to kill him. The powers, or the illusion of power, I think that's where I'm really going with this, that we have this illusion of control, this illusion of power, that we are somehow able to control everything. And maybe this is a cultural thing for us now, but that tends to be this thing that we come back to. And I've had a lot of conversation with different individuals about this notion in recent history, which is probably why I'm thinking about it. But if this past year, which in my congregation, in my community here, has been kind of rough, especially in about the last 4 months, there's been a lot of death. There's been a lot of hardship. And if we think of in the greater culture, 2016 has been really rough on like 80s pop culture people. We've lost a lot of people that way. And so maybe that's a weird thing to reference, but I think that way. And if it teaches us anything, it's that the illusion of power is nothing but an illusion, that we actually hold no power. Now, can we plan? Can we prep? Can we do things? Absolutely. Do we expect tomorrow? Absolutely. But are we guaranteed tomorrow? No, we're not. And this year has really shown that. And so we begin to question then, well, what is power? What is the source of power? And does it completely go against that which we expect? And this story is a wonderful example of that. We have Herod, who's the political power, who is threatened by a baby, a helpless baby who can do nothing, who is a passive participant, just like Mary, Jesus and Mary, as I mentioned before, both passive, and hold no power of their own. That's what amazes me about the birth of Jesus, that God comes into the world utterly helpless, utterly powerless, utterly dependent. That's the amazing thing about the birth of God, the birth of Jesus. And we see it here, that the political power feels threatened by this who is powerless. And yes, Jesus being God has power. Yes, I get that. We see it later with his miracles that he performs. We see it later with his resurrection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I get that. But at this point, he is a helpless baby, born in humble means. And yet the political power is threatened by that. Later on, once Jesus is fully grown and is doing his ministry, the religious elite, the religious power, the powers that be are threatened by him. This power of God coming into the world in ways that completely and totally go against that which we expect to be what we expect to be. It's a threat to those in power, and those who perhaps abuse their power. And I think so much about a week ago for Christmas Day, our gospel text came out of John 1, which is the light shining in the darkness. And I talked some about the notion of the darkness does not understand the light, but it is threatened by it. Darkness flees from the light because it cannot exist. They cannot coexist. But the powers of darkness in this world fight tooth and nail against the light continuing to come and spread into the world. And this is what we see. Herod is a perfect example. Later on, the Pharisees and the Sadducees opposing Jesus will be another one. The power of God, the ultimate source of power, is a threat to those in power or those who have the illusion of power and want to hold on to it. And what does that say for us? And you know what? I don't exactly know, but that's kind of the direction that I'm going. And I say I've been rambling on for quite a while now, so I'm going to wrap this up. If you have thoughts, questions, comments based on this, by all means share those, and we'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, a blessed new year, that this season, this holiday season has been a blessing for you, and continues to be as we move through these last few days of it, and then get kind of back into the normal flow again in the new year. We'll catch you next time.